What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts and absolutely refuses to play by the rules? The clash that unfolded between Denzel Washington and Joy Behar wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral when two strong personalities collide over a topic neither one was willing to back down from. Before we dive into every single detail of this explosive conversation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on. Because trust me, by the end of this, you're going to have a very strong opinion. Let's get into it. The stage was set on a regular Tuesday morning. Denzel Washington had been making the rounds promoting his latest project, and The View was just another stop on what should have been a routine press tour. But from the moment he walked onto that stage, something felt different. The usual warm welcome was there. The audience applause was enthusiastic, but there was an edge to Joy Behar's smile that anyone who watches the show regularly would have recognized immediately. She had something on her mind, and she was going to make sure it came up. The first few minutes were standard fare. They talked about his new film, his preparation process, his legendary career spanning decades. Denzel was charming, as always, giving thoughtful answers, making the audience laugh with perfectly timed anecdotes. Joy seemed engaged, nodding along, asking follow-up questions that showed she'd actually done her homework. Everything was going exactly as these interviews typically go. Then Joy shifted in her seat, and her tone changed completely. "So, Denzel," she began, and you could hear the shift in her voice. "I want to ask you about something you said a few months ago. You were talking about personal responsibility, about how people need to take control of their own lives and stop blaming systems for their problems. Now, I found that really interesting, coming from someone who's obviously had to navigate plenty of obstacles in this industry." Denzel's expression didn't change, but there was a pause, just a brief one, before he responded. "I remember that conversation." "Yes. What about it?" "Well," Joy continued, leaning forward slightly, "don't you think that's a bit simplistic? I mean, we're living in a time where systemic issues are very real, where inequality is documented, where opportunities aren't exactly equal for everyone. Telling people to just work harder, to just take responsibility, doesn't that ignore the very real barriers that exist?" The audience got quiet. This wasn't the light, promotional banter they'd been watching moments before. Denzel took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was measured but firm. "Joy, I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My father was a Pentecostal minister, my mother owned a beauty salon. We weren't wealthy. I saw struggle every single day. But what I also saw was people who didn't make excuses. They worked, they sacrificed, they believed that their effort mattered. And you know what? It did matter." Joy wasn't backing down. "But that's anecdotal, Denzel. Your personal experience, as inspiring as it is, doesn't negate the statistical reality that some people face significantly more obstacles than others. A kid growing up in an underfunded school district with limited resources, with parents working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. That kid doesn't have the same starting point as someone born into wealth and privilege." "I never said everyone has the same starting point," Denzel replied. And now there was an intensity in his eyes that the cameras caught perfectly. "What I said was that focusing solely on obstacles, on victimhood, on what you can't control, that mindset is paralyzing. It strips people of their agency. When you tell someone that the system is rigged against them and there's nothing they can do about it, you're essentially telling them to give up before they even start." Joy shook her head, clearly disagreeing. "No one is saying give up. We're saying acknowledge reality. We're saying fight for change, advocate for better systems, demand equality. You can't fix a problem if you won't even admit it exists." "I'm not denying problems exist," Denzel said, his voice rising slightly. "But there's a difference between acknowledging a problem and using it as a permanent excuse. I've seen too many talented people, brilliant people, waste their potential because someone convinced them they're victims of circumstances beyond their control. That's not empowerment, Joy. That's a trap." The other hosts on the panel were exchanging glances, clearly unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. The audience was completely silent now, every eye fixed on the two of them. Joy pressed on, her voice taking on an edge. "So what do you say to the single mother working to minimum wage jobs who can't afford childcare, who can't afford to go back to school, who's barely surviving? You tell her to just work harder. To take more responsibility, Denzel didn't hesitate. I tell her that her situation is difficult, that it's unfair, that she's working harder than most people ever will. But I also tell her that she has more power than she thinks. I tell her to look for opportunities, to network, to ask for help, to be relentless about finding a way forward. Because the alternative, Joy, the alternative is to sit there and wait for some system to change, some government program to save her, some politician to fix everything. And while she's waiting, years go by. Her kids grow up. Life passes her by. Joy's face was flushed now, her hands gesturing emphatically. That is incredibly privileged thinking. Denzel, you made it. Congratulations. Truly. But your success doesn't mean the system works. It means you're an exception. And telling people to just be exceptional, to just work harder in a system designed to keep them down, that's not inspiring. That's cruel. The word hung in the air. Cruel. The audience gasped audibly. Denzel's jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like he might stand up and walk off. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and spoke with a cold precision that was somehow more powerful than if he'd yelled, "Cruel," he repeated slowly. You think encouraging people to take control of their lives is cruel. You know what I think is cruel, Joy? Convincing an entire generation that they're powerless, that their dreams don't matter because of some abstract system. That's cruel. Because I've lived long enough to see what happens to people who embrace that mindset, they become bitter, they become resentful, they stop trying. And then they look around 10-20 years later and wonder why nothing changed. Joy wasn't having it. She uncrossed her legs and sat up straighter, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You're putting words in my mouth, Denzel. Nobody is telling anyone they're powerless. What we're saying is that individual effort isn't enough when the game is rigged. You can work yourself to death and still end up nowhere if the structures around you are designed to fail you. That's not victimhood. That's reality. Denzel shook his head slowly, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth, but it wasn't a friendly one. The game is rigged. You know how many times I heard that growing up? You know how many people told me I'd never make it because of where I came from? Because of what I looked like? Because the industry wasn't ready for someone like me. And you know what would have happened if I listened to them? I'd still be in Mount Vernon talking about how unfair everything is, instead of sitting here having built a career I'm proud of. But you had talent, Joy shot back immediately. You had something special that most people don't have. You can't generalize your exceptional circumstance to everyone else's ordinary reality. Talent? Denzel's voice rose now, genuine frustration breaking through. Joy, do you know how many talented people never make it? Talent is the bare minimum. What separates people who succeed from people who don't isn't talent. It's persistence, it's discipline, it's refusing to quit when things get hard. And yes, it's taking responsibility for your choices, instead of blaming everything on forces outside your control. Joy leaned forward, her finger pointing at him across the table. This is exactly the problem with your perspective. You're conflating systemic critique with personal weakness. Someone can work hard, be disciplined, be persistent, and still get crushed by circumstances beyond their control. A medical emergency that bankrupts them. A recession that eliminates their industry. Discrimination that closes doors before they even get to knock. These aren't excuses, Denzel. These are documented realities. And I'm not denying any of that, Denzel countered, his voice forceful. What I'm saying is that sitting around cataloging all the ways the world is unfair doesn't change anything. Action changes things. Personal action. I'm not talking about ignoring systemic issues. I'm talking about not letting them paralyze you. There's a difference between fighting against injustice and using injustice as a reason to never even try. One of the other hosts finally jumped in, trying to mediate. I think maybe there's some common ground here. We can acknowledge systemic problems while also encouraging individual effort, right? But Joy wasn't interested in common ground. No, I don't think we can just gloss over this. Because what Denzel is describing, whether he realizes it or not, is survivor bias. He survived the system, so he thinks everyone can, if they just try hard enough, but that completely ignores all the people who tried just as hard and didn't make it. Where's their story? Oh right, we don't hear about them because they're not sitting on talk shows telling people to work harder. Denzel's eyes flashed. You don't know anything about the people I've known who didn't make it. You don't know about my friends who gave up, who stopped believing in themselves because people like you convinced them the deck was too stacked. I've watched people with incredible potential throw it away because they bought into this narrative that effort doesn't matter, that the system is everything. So don't tell me about survivor bias when I've seen with my own eyes what your philosophy does to people. The audience was completely transfixed now. This had gone way beyond a typical daytime television disagreement. Joy's face was red, her voice getting louder. My philosophy is that we need to fix broken systems, not tell people to smile and work harder while those systems grind them down. Your philosophy is essentially telling people that if they fail, it's their fault. That's victim blaming, dressed up as motivation. That's not what I'm saying, and you know it, Denzel fired back. I'm saying that waiting for systems to change before you take action is a recipe for a wasted life. Yes, fight for change. Yes, advocate for justice. But while you're doing that, also take every opportunity you can. Make the best choices available to you and refuse to see yourself as helpless. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, Joy, but you seem determined to make them that way. Joy threw her hands up because one of those messages gets heard way louder than the other. When someone with your platform says personal responsibility is the answer, people hear that and think we don't need to change anything. Employers hear that and think they don't need to pay better wages. Politicians hear that and think they don't need to fund social programs. Your message, intentionally or not, provides cover for people who want to maintain an unjust status quo. Denzel leaned forward now, his voice dropping lower but somehow more intense. So, what's your solution, Joy? Keep telling people they're victims. Keep feeding them a steady diet of grievance and resentment. You think that builds better lives? You think that creates success? I've seen where that road leads, and it doesn't lead anywhere good. People need hope. They need to believe their actions matter. They need to feel like they have agency in their own lives. They need honest assessment of reality, Joy countered. False hope is worse than no hope. Telling someone to just work harder when they're already working 3 jobs, when they're already doing everything right and it's still not enough. That's not hope, Denzel. That's telling them their struggle is their fault. No, Denzel said firmly. Their struggle is not their fault, but their response to that struggle is their responsibility. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. That's not gaslighting. That's the only path to actual empowerment. Because if you believe you're just a victim of systems, then you're giving all your power away to those systems. Joy shook her head vigorously. This is circular logic. You're saying people should just accept broken systems and work within them instead of demanding they be fixed. That's exactly how injustice perpetuates itself. If everyone followed your advice, nothing would ever change because everyone would be too busy pulling themselves up by their bootstraps to demand better bootstraps. I never said don't demand change, Denzel responded, his frustration evident. I said don't wait for change to start living your life. Don't put your dreams on hold until society becomes perfect. It's never going to be perfect, Joy. There will always be obstacles. There will always be unfairness. So what? We just give up. We just tell people to wait for some magical day when everything is equal and fair. We tell people to fight for that day, Joy said passionately. We tell them their anger is justified, their frustration is valid, and the system that's failing them needs to be torn down and rebuilt. We don't tell them to accommodate injustice. We tell them to rage against it. Denzel's expression was hard now. And while they're raging, while they're waiting for the revolution, their kids are growing up, their opportunities are passing by, their lives are happening. Rage doesn't pay bills. Joy, rage doesn't put food on the table. At some point, people have to make practical decisions about their actual lives, not their theoretical ones. Joy's voice was sharp as she responded. So your answer is, just accept the scraps you're given and be grateful. Just accommodate yourself to injustice because fixing it is too inconvenient for your timeline. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps oppressive systems in place. Denzel, people who benefit from those systems love it when everyone else just decides to work within them instead of tearing them down. Denzel's calm was starting to crack, his voice rising with each word. You keep twisting what I'm saying into something it's not. I'm not telling anyone to accept scraps. I'm telling them not to wait for permission to succeed. Not to wait for society to give them a fair shake before they start building something, because that wait could last forever. And in the meantime, they've accomplished nothing except feeling justified in their bitterness. Justified bitterness, Joy repeated, her tone mocking. Listen to yourself. People are struggling, genuinely struggling, and you're dismissing their legitimate grievances as bitterness. This is why your message is so damaging. It reframes systemic failure as personal failure. It takes the responsibility off institutions and puts it entirely on individuals who are already carrying more than they should have to. You want to know what's damaging? Denzel's voice was forceful now, his hands gesturing emphatically. What's damaging is raising generations of people who think they're owed something, who think success should be handed to them, who've been told so many times that the system is against them that they never even try. I meet young people all the time who've given up before. They've even started because they've been fed this narrative that effort is pointless. That's damaging joy. That destroys potential. Joy wasn't backing down an inch. Nobody is saying success should be handed to anyone. We're saying the playing field should be level. We're saying people shouldn't have to work 10 times harder just because of circumstances they were born into. We're saying the system should serve everyone equally, not just the lucky few who manage to claw their way out despite all the barriers. Why is that so controversial to you? It's not controversial, Denzel said, his jaw tight. What's controversial to me is telling people that their effort doesn't matter, that they're just pawns in some rigged game. You don't empower people by convincing them they're powerless. Joy, you empower them by helping them see what they can control, what choices they can make, what actions they can take. Everything else is just rhetoric that makes you feel good but doesn't help anyone. Joy's face was flushed with anger now. So decades of civil rights activism, labor movements, social justice work, that's all just rhetoric. All those people fighting for systemic change, they're just wasting their time because everyone should just focus on personal responsibility. Do you hear how insulting that is? Denzel stood his ground. That's not what I said. Those movements mattered because they changed structures that needed changing. But those movements were also full of individuals who took personal action, who made sacrifices, who didn't sit around waiting for someone else to fix things. They combined collective action with personal responsibility. That's the part you keep leaving out. You can't have one without the other. But you emphasize one so much more than the other, Joy pressed. Your entire message is about personal responsibility, personal effort, personal choices. You barely acknowledge the systemic side. And when you do acknowledge it, it's always with this caveat that people shouldn't let it stop them. Well, sometimes it does stop them. Denzel? Sometimes the barriers are too high, the resources too limited, the discrimination too pervasive. And those people deserve better than to be told they just didn't try hard enough. Denzel's voice was steel. I have never, not once, told someone they didn't try hard enough. What I've told people is that they have more power than they think, more options than they realize, more agency than they've been led to believe. If you think that message is harmful, then we fundamentally disagree about what helps people move forward in life. We do fundamentally disagree, because I think your message lets society off the hook. It says we don't need to fix schools, we don't need to raise wages, we don't need to address discrimination, because if people just work hard enough, they'll be fine. That's a fantasy, Denzel. A dangerous fantasy that protects the powerful and abandons the vulnerable. Denzel shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. You're so invested in this narrative that you can't even hear what I'm actually saying. I'm not against fixing schools or raising wages or fighting discrimination. I'm against telling people that until those things happen, they should just accept defeat. I'm against creating a culture where people see themselves primarily as victims instead of as agents of their own destiny. Agents of their own destiny, Joy repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That sounds great in a motivational poster, Denzel, but it falls apart the second you look at actual data. Social mobility is declining. The wealth gap is expanding. People are working harder than ever and falling further behind. Those are facts. And your response to those facts is essentially ignore them and work harder. That's not wisdom, that's delusion. The other hosts had given up trying to moderate. They sat in silence, watching this clash unfold with wide eyes. Denzel's voice was quieter now, but somehow more cutting. You know what I think, Joy? I think you're comfortable with people staying stuck, because if they stay stuck, they need people like you to speak for them, to advocate for them, to tell them how victimized they are. But if they take control of their lives, if they find their own path forward, they don't need you anymore. Maybe that's what this is really about." The audience gasped. Joy's mouth dropped open. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you suggest that I want people to suffer? I've spent my career fighting for working people, for marginalized communities, for anyone who's been pushed to the edges of society. And you have the audacity to sit here and claim I have some selfish motive? That's beneath you, Denzel." Denzel didn't flinch. "Then why do you fight so hard against a message of empowerment? Why does it bother you so much when I tell people they have power over their own lives? If you really cared about helping people, you'd want them to feel capable, not helpless. But every word out of your mouth today has been about limitations, about barriers, about why people can't succeed. At some point, you have to ask yourself who that message really serves." Joy stood up from her chair, her voice loud. "This interview is over. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of wanting people to fail by someone who's so disconnected from reality that he thinks a positive attitude solves systemic oppression. You can see yourself out." Denzel stood as well, his expression calm despite the chaos. "I'll leave. But before I do, let me say one more thing. There are people watching this right now who are struggling, who are tired, who are facing real obstacles, and they're hearing two very different messages. You're telling them they're victims of forces beyond their control. I'm telling them they have more power than they know. History will show which message actually helped people build better lives." He walked off the stage without another word, leaving Joy standing there, visibly shaking with anger. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or sit in stunned silence. Most chose silence. The cameras kept rolling as Joy tried to compose herself, her co-hosts exchanging bewildered looks. Nobody quite sure what to say after what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't just a clash of opinions. It was a collision of entirely different worldviews, and neither person had given an inch. The question wasn't who won the argument, because in arguments like this, nobody really wins. The question was, which message would resonate more with the people watching? Which philosophy would they carry with them when they turned off their screens and went back to their own struggles, their own challenges, their own lives? So now it's your turn. After hearing both sides lay out their positions with no filter, no sugarcoating, no attempt to find middle ground, whose message do you think serves people better? Hit that subscribe button if you want more content that dives deep into the conversations everyone else is afraid to have. And drop a comment below answering this question. If you had to choose one piece of advice to follow, would you rather be told the system is the problem and needs to change? Or would you rather be told you have the power to change your own circumstances? Let me know in the comments.